Hey guys, so just to start us off with, I went ahead and put like a couple text elements in here, just to avoid having to watch me type. So I've got this titled "Basic Photo Adjustments 2." Look at my name down there, little smaller letters, and I've got original, and then we're going to start off with an adjustment called the exposure. So exposure is much like levels. We'll get into the differences in just a second here. I'm just going to make two copies of it. I'm going to put one over here. I'm going to put one down here, and we're going to get rid of this third one here in a second. But I just wanted to show what exposure does. So let's kind of zoom in here. This is kind of a dark photo. I'll click this one. I'll get it selected. Image, adjustments, exposure. And it's like anything else. You pull the exposure down, it gets darker. You pull the exposure up, it gets brighter. So I can pull this exposure up. In this case, this one looks okay at around 2 or so. But notice like the collar of this little conductor's this mannequin here, it's getting a little bit too overexposed, and so some of the white areas are getting a little bit too overexposed. If I click on the offset, this will again, it's like adding like a layer of black or a layer of white on top of it. Kind of washes it out. I can just keep this at 0. Oops. Let me do that real quick. Image, adjustment, exposure, and just pull this up a little bit. And say about 1.7 here. The gamma correction, I want to say, is trying to keep your colors a little bit more balanced. But again, it's all just kind of back and forth. I think this probably looks a little better. Okay, so again, just experiment with these things. Find a photo that you think is a little bit too dark. Mess around with the exposure. Mess around with the offset. Mess around with the gamma correction. See if you can't come up with something that you think looks good. But let's compare how exposure and levels works. I'm going to grab this layer, image, adjustments, levels, and I'll do the same thing I did before. I'll pull the midtones down a little bit towards the shadows. And I'll pull the highlights down a little bit too. Okay, so if I were to just compare the two, it looks as if that exposure, as opposed to levels, I think exposure treats colors a little differently. And again, it's not like one's superior to the other. I think it's more just like what you're looking for. Like all this comes down to personal preference. I generally tend to use levels because it's a little more predictable in terms of like what you're doing. With exposure, sometimes like this, some of the lighter areas tend to flash all of a sudden. I will say though, I do like the way the colors look. When it comes to this, I think it has like both a brightness and a saturation kind of effect to it. So this is exposure, and these are levels. So make sure we're using the exposure tool for this one. All right, so we'll just come over this way. So that's exposure. The next one is curves, and we'll actually do a couple curves to this. I'm just going to grab a new photo up here. I'll grab one whose colors I think could be tweaked a bit. Look down here. I'll come down this way. I think like this one should be a good one for the curves. So this is my son and my niece and my dad. So I'll just sort of swim this down here, get this about the same size as these guys here. Okay. Sure. Hold down shift to make sure they're lined up. Right? You hold down shift to constrain things. So I'll just grab these two things. Hold down shift to select more than one thing. Alt drag to duplicate it. Hold down shift to keep it lined up. And then I'm going to call this curves adjusted. And so I'll click on this guy here. Make sure everything's lined up. Okay. All right. So curves. Curves essentially work with, it's sort of a graphical representation of how colors, how the different levels of your red, greens, and blues have been sort of adjusted here. So let me see if I can't zoom in some. All right. So we can kind of get a good look at this. All right. So I'll just image adjustments. Curves. We've got several different kinds of curves. In this case, we're going to be working with the RGB channel. We can work with the red, green, or blue channel, and each one of these things has its own, shall we say, use. So just to kind of show what's going on here, I'm going to take my RGB and I'm going to come over here. This right here just represents our shadows, all this stuff. Right, and so in this case, I've pulled my shadows up. Right, this represents my highlights. I'll pull this down. My highlights go down. Right, and so we can kind of see like how the lighter areas are now darker, and the darker areas are now lighter. That gives us like a weird kind of like thing to it. If I pull this down, my darker areas become a little bit darker. My lighter areas become a little bit lighter. right? And so this kind of gives it more of a, more contrast, more of an intense sort of depth to it. I might sort of move this up a little bit here, and I might move this some here. I might move my midtones down some, maybe see if that does anything, right? So various things like this, right? I tend to do a little S-curve with my shadows down slightly and my highlights up a little bit. Again, this is all down to personal preference. You can kind of take a look and see, but you definitely want to see like a marked difference here. In this case, it's a good difference here. But that's what that does. So I'll just press OK. That's basic curves, the use of curves right here. So you can kind of see the difference here. Where in this case, the shadows are somewhat mellow. In this case, the shadows are somewhat intense. Just to show you, I'm just going to alt drag this one down. Actually, I'll just alt drag this one down here. If I were to use the RGB, or like use the red, green, or blue curves, so just go to image adjustments. Oops, just drag it a little bit here. So I'll just show what's going on. Rotate the whole thing. Okay. Image adjustments, curves. And I just choose, instead of RGB, just choose red. Basically what this does is it takes all the reds and makes them more intense. So all the shadow reds, all the highlight reds, right? I could pull the reds up on the highlights a little bit, pull the reds down on the highlights a little bit, right? And this has the effect of, like, say, warming it up, right? If I pulled the reds down, you would see that it would look a little bit more blue, or a little more green in this case, because red and green's kind of like, or in this case blue is kind of opposite each other. So it's kind of cooling it off a little bit in different spots here, there, right? I could reset this. Let me see if I can reset this. Okay. I'll cancel this, and I'll just go to image adjustments, curves, and I'll choose the blue, or in this case green, and you can kind of see what happens when I mess with the greens. So greens go up, greens go down, turns a little more red, right? So you can kind of see, like, it basically has the effect of like adding a bit of a tint to it. I'll do the blues for the last one here. Hello. Okay. Image adjustment, curves, and I'll do blues. And blues, I think, has a good effect of like a sort of a cooling effect. So I kind of pull the highlights up a little bit. Now everything, it looks a little bit cooler, a little less when I say cooler, the colors tend to have a temperature. This actually looks kind of nice. Let me pull this up a little bit more. Could cool it off a little more. Pull this down some more. So you've got, like, warm shadows and cool highlights. That gives a nice little contrast and stuff. So this gives you the opportunity of, like, doing some really crazy stuff with the colors and stuff, right? So if you've ever seen those kind of like glowing eye memes, they usually tend to take the curves and take those to interesting places here. So for instance, I check my reds, and I'll sort of like drag this all the way up here, like so. And then now everything's just like super red. You can just drag it as far as it'll go. Right, and so now everything's like just way over the top. So that's the general idea when it comes to using your curves. So the idea is you have your shadows, your midtones, your highlights, and you basically just choose a channel to kind of intensify those. So you can actually pinpoint, I want the shadows to be like more intense, I want the highlights to be a little less intense, and so I'm going to create some nice little contrast here. I think it looks really especially interesting, like around, like, say for instance, if you get like a older person with some wrinkly features and stuff, like it'll definitely show like the light bouncing off the areas and the shadows deepening the wrinkles and stuff. So it's an interesting little tool there. So curves are a very, very nice tool. Oops. Okay, so the last we're going to talk about are the dodge and burn tools. So I'm going to get two pictures here. I'll get this picture of me and my son. None. Stop giving me pop-ups. No. All right, that's. We'll just sort of pull this down here. See if we can drag this in. Now the whole thing is a little off center a little bit, so let me see if I can't pull this back 1 second here. View. All right. Okay. Well, anyways, what we'll do once again, we'll just grab this here and we'll get our text dragged down. I'll drag that down. Yeah, let's use my, so I'll say dodge tool used. I'll explain what that means in a second here. Okay, so the idea here is we've got two tools. We've got dodge and we've got burn, and they're found the same way. Right? We look over here. We go down. We should see this little. It looks like a little lollipop. If you don't see that, you might see this little like kind of hand giving a bit of a pinch. The dodge tool, essentially, what that does is it lightens areas in an image. So say, for instance, this thing right here. Let's do a little experiment. I want to drag up my levels some. Let's see, here we go to adjustments. This little area of my my jacket is a little bit too dark. I want to see a little more detail with that. So I'm going to go over here to my levels, and I'm going to drag my levels up, right? But what starts to happen is my face and the window outside starts getting washed out and overexposed, even though I can see my jacket really nice. Now, I could do a manner of things where I kind of composite two parts of the image and I do a little blend, but I don't want to do that. I just want to brighten up this little area of the jacket. I want to just brighten up a single little area. That's where I use my dodge. I use my dodge tool, and it gives me the options here. So I can't quite touch it now, so that's why we have to rasterize it. I'll right-click here and I'll say rasterize the layer, and now I can kind of edit this. So what I'll do is I'm just going to take my dodge tool. I'm using the square brackets to kind of go back and forth as far as the size goes. So I'm kind of pulling my brackets up and down, and if you look over here, you can see the size of it. And you click on this little arrow here, you can see a couple different options. You've got size and you've got hardness. Hardness basically just means that when we use it, it's going to have like a faded edge. If I pull the hardness to 100%, it'll have a totally opaque edge. It'll have like a very clean edge. So click on that. Let's look here. Right. So the exposure. So once again, this is also affecting the exposure here. So let's see if we can. Right. So I'm clicking on here. You can kind of see it's sort of brightening up. Sort of increasing the exposure here as I go. So you can kind of see that like this is actually creating an effect that I'm not a big fan of. So I'm going to undo this. So I'm going to press Control Z, and in order to back up several steps, I'm going to press Control Alt and Z. Right. So and you just keep tapping Z. I have Control and Alt held down. I'm going to keep tapping this. I'm going to keep tapping this until I look over here and I see that my layer is no longer rasterized. I'm going to back this up a little bit. Almost. I think we might have hit the end of the line here. There's a limited number of times you can undo. Let's edit. Oh, we can't see my numbers anymore. Okay, so once again, the dodge tool essentially just, let's see here, we use shadows here. The dodge tool is simply meant to increase the exposure of a specific area, much of the same way we did before. And so in order to do that, we just gotta, actually I'm just gonna delete this picture altogether. Delete this and just start over. So I'm just gonna Alt drag, hold down Shift. So find an area that has like a well-lit area, but also has like a little spot of shadow. And rasterize your picture. Rasterize layer. And then we can use our dodge tool. And basically, I have my exposure set to 50%. And you're just going to want to like sort of run it along there and give it a second to kind of get some of the shadows out. And I'll make it a little bit smaller. Just going to hit alongside this arm, just right along the side here. So yeah, now what's great about this is now I'm seeing a little more detail in some of the areas. So like maybe this little shadowy area here, I'll bring that out some more. Maybe like this little area here behind the seat, I'll drag that out a little bit more. And one more hit. All right, that's probably good. And one hit right here with the color. Cool. So I'm not killing the shadows, but I am seeing a little more detail in different areas here. So that's a good little tool. Then again, but then the areas of my face and all that stuff like that didn't go away. And it looks like I've created some streaks here. You can kind of like in this case, let me back this up some. That's where the hardness comes into play. So if I take my hardness down to 0, then you'll have like kind of sort of softer edges, and so you won't have those really distinct streaks. So drag this around just to kind of brighten up everything a little bit. I'll brighten this up right here. Do one more. Drag this up along the side of the arm. So I know I'm kind of like doing this and undoing it. It's like a lot of things when it comes to, you know, art. You look at stuff. This is obviously technical. It's like 90% technical, I would say, and then like 10% art. So kind of looking at it and developing your own little technique to it. So yeah, all right. So yeah, just compare the pictures. Just like all it is like the shirt's a little bit, the jacket's a little bit brighter. All right, so I'll just take these two pictures here. Actually, I'll take this text and I'll just drag this down. Hold on, Alt and Shift. Let me get my picture in here. Let's find a picture that's a little bit that's well exposed minus a little bright area. I think I like this one here. Yeah, I'll choose say. This one here. All right. So the next one is burn. I think I already used a picture similar to this, but the burn tool essentially is used to darken areas that you think are a little too overexposed. So this picture is fine, and I like it okay. But just to show you what we're looking at here, make sure you bring everything up a little bit. Bring everything up slightly. Over here, it's original, and then just find a picture that you think has a kind of an overexposed area. This doesn't like bring together like new colors, but for instance, like here, like the side of her face, I think is just a bit too shadowed. Maybe, you know, I mean, you could kind of argue that. So I'm going to hold the mouse button down on this little lollipop kind of icon and find my little burn tool here. Now the burn tool, once again, we have to rasterize the layer. So this little layer right here, I'm going to right click on it and say rasterize. And again, I'm going to make sure my edges are pretty soft, like the hardness is down to 0%. And you can just kind of watch what happens when you sort of pull this down. You can kind of see it starts to darken a little bit. And it's limited in its effectiveness in terms of like there still has to be enough color information available for it to sort of like extrapolate what it would look like if it was like if the exposure was down some, right? So in this case, maybe I'm going to do my highlights instead of my midtones. So I'll sort of like darken this. In this case, I'm not sure I like that. It looks almost like a bruise at that point. I'm going to try to hit this right here. I'm not sure I like that. Maybe I'll choose my shadows and darken the shadows a little bit. What happens there? Still a whole lot of shadows there. You can kind of see a little bit of happening here. All right. And again, this is a subtle change. So let's see, maybe I'll get my midtones one more time. I'm going back and forth. The idea with, once again, with the dodge tool and the burn tool is that this is a real specific area here. Now, I would hazard a guess that it's hard to see the difference here if you're not looking. I think it looks, I will say I'm not like the biggest fan. It looks like sort of a bruise in her eye. But the point is that if you want to isolate a specific part of the person's, of the photo and just darken it, you could darken just like if I just wanted to darken the face, right? Or if I wanted to just, say, for instance, darken the hand, I could kind of pull this down a little bit and sort of, you know, darken the hand, right? Or darken the shirt, or darken the sleeve, one of those things. In this case, the sleeve is overexposed, so there's no way I can like add any color to that unless I wanted to paint it. So that's what the dodge tool, that's what the burn tool does. Burn tool. Okay, so that's essentially it. Just we've got exposure, curves, dodge, and burn. Those are some tools that we can kind of put into our little toolbox. I'm going to see if I can't drag this up a little bit here. Maybe drag this up too. Oops. All right, so pull this a little bit. All right, good. Okay, good. So once again, just have this lined up here. Just give me a clear margin on the side, you know, clear margin on the bottom. Yeah, save it as a JPEG file. Save as. Make sure you know where it's being saved to. In this case, it's being saved as a JPEG. And when we see it inside the file, we should see, make sure it's always set to maximum. Okay. We'll see it's in the pictures file here. I said it's an untitled. Name it whenever you save it. But all right, cool. Well, all right. So yes, again, you just choose 4 photos that you like, 4 photos of your own, and yeah, can't wait to see you guys produce. See you in class.